Hello guys, and welcome back to another video. It's been a little bit since I've said that. It's been a little bit since I've made a cards video, but don't worry guys, I'm still here. I have not intended to delete this channel or anything like that. I'm not done. I'm just taking a break from cards. And part of that is I'm not really enjoying playing cards at the moment, so it's hard to make videos about cards when I don't enjoy playing the game. But what I'm back here today to talk about is Homefront Early War, which is the spring mini expansion that is coming to cards. And hopefully these cards can help rejuvenate my personal enjoyment of the game, as well as your own enjoyment of the game, whether it is still there or it is not. And alongside this expansion, there is a number of balance changes, and I will talk about that in a separate video. This video is just going over the Homefront Early War cards, which I believe is the name of the expansion, which I'm actually going to double check right now, because, yes, Homefront Early War. Okay. So, this is a 24-card expansion. It's a mini set, and this means there's going to be 4 cards for each main nation, 1 of each rarity, and then 1 card for each of the 4 ally nations. And the power level of these cards is typically going to be higher than the average power level of cards from a full expansion because there is fewer of them and you want to have them have a similar impact on the meta. So, yeah, expect the power level to be a bit higher than normal. That is standard for these types of expansions. And also, don't expect them to necessarily create any new archetypes. They tend to either add on to existing archetypes or give a archetype that has not really existed in a competitive level the tool they need to get across the line into the realm of competitiveness. This is sort of the aim of a mini set. Now, whether it's going to meet all of these things is something that we will see while we go through the cards, but that's kind of the typical goal of a mini set for like this type of card game where you're not introducing that many cards, and that's just sort of the reality of that. So, let's jump into them. These are, since they're all been revealed, I'm going to go through them in the order of nation rather than the order that they were revealed in. So let's just start from the top with Germany. So the German elite is Conquest, a 2-credit order. Draw a card for each unit type you control. So this is a very fascinating card. I've seen a lot of discussion about this card, and generally speaking, people seem to be much more excited about this card than I am. So, at its best, this is a 2-mana draw 5. If you have an infantry, an artillery, a tank, a fighter, and a bomber on the board. This is 2-mana draw 5, or 2 credits draw 5. I've been playing a lot of Hearthstone, if you couldn't tell. And 2 credits draw 5 is incredibly good. Absolutely, insanely incredibly good. But when are you ever going to have 1 of each unit type on the board? That's, I don't know, it's Combined Arms has existed in the game forever, and there's been a number of different metas where Combined Arms has been a card that has been played in competitive decks. Have you ever seen a single Combined Arms give +5/+5? Like, everyone in my comments will probably be like, yes, I have seen it once. But the point is, you're not seeing that all the time. It is not easy to get that. So the question is, how easy is this to... What are the breakpoints for this card in terms of what you're happy with? So if you're drawing a single card, so if you just have a unit on the board, or you have 9 units on the board, but they're all of the same type, this draws you a single card, and that is not good enough. But when you come into card draw, if you're saying, oh, it only draws you 1 card, at least it replaces itself, which in some decks is fine. If you're playing a unit-heavy German deck, generally speaking, you're fairly aggressive. So you're probably not fine if this is drawing you 1 card, just because of the tempo loss of 2-mana draw 1. But, like, for example, there's control decks where you run stuff like Bloody Sickle, where it's like 1 mana draw 1, and you just play it on your own unit because you just want to, like, cycle through the deck and get to your heavier hitting cards. But generally speaking, that's not good. And I should also mention that if you don't have any units, like if you've been wiped off the board and you top deck this is 2 mana draw nothing. So that's obviously terrible. If you have a unit of 2 different unit types, which is not difficult for most German decks to do multiple different times during the game. This is 2 mana, draw 2, and you're happy with it. It's slightly better Convoy. There's a number of different cards in the game that have existed that have allowed you to draw 2 cards if you meet certain requirements, and this is fairly similar to that because a lot of, basically every German deck will at one point have 2 unit types on the board, but the issue is you need 2 unit types on the board with this card in your hand, and then you also need to be able to spend the 2 credits on this card in that situation. So, like, you're going to not be able to do this in 100% of games, but you're probably going to be able to do 2 mana, draw 2 in, like, 90% of games that you see this card. And then if you have 3 unit types on the board, and I think this is where it starts getting less likely. Like, at that point, you need to start setting this up. And once you start having to set this up, rather than just spend this, play this at the start of your turn to draw, 2 cards and see your other options, if you have to set it up, this card becomes worse, because you're getting an opportunity cost. Now you're making trades to keep certain units alive that you otherwise wouldn't, or you're holding cards back in your hand because you want to be able to play them with Conquest down the line. And these all have impacts on the game that are not easy to see, but they are real. But if you are certainly building a combined arms type deck and around the theme of running multiple different units, 2 credits, draw 3 is something you're still probably going to be able to hit fairly often. But if you're playing this in a other German deck, just like a generic German mid-range that is just running the good German units, you're probably not going to get 2 mana, draw 3, or 2 credits, draw 3 on this more than, I'd be shocked if you're getting this more than 40% of the time. That being said, if it's 2 credits, draw 2, 60% of the time, and then it's 2 credits, draw 3, 35% of the time, and then 5% of the time it's 2 credits, draw 1, that's a good card. That's a card you will throw into your deck. Absolutely. Because there's not really much opportunity cost to run this in your deck, because almost every German deck is going to be running units of different types. And you don't have to be running all 5 unit types in your deck for this to be a good card. It's just, I don't think this is the S tier cracked, giga broken card that I've seen some people call it. I think that this is just a solid 4 to 5 elite that you'll play in your decks, most decks, if you have it, and it's going to be, on average, beneficial to your deck, but I would be surprised with the cards that currently exist in the game if this card is going to be that busted. That being said, did Germany need an elite card draw? Maybe not, because historically speaking, card draw is intended to be one of Germany's sort of class weaknesses. They have to rely on sort of weird card draw options like Enigma, and this is technically a weird card draw option, but Enigma is draw cards equal to how far ahead your opponent is on card advantage, where this is draw cards based on how far ahead you are on board, which is quite a bit different. But anyways, don't want to spend forever here, so let's move on to card number 2, which is the 36th Kradschützen. It is a 2 credit 1/4 infantry special rarity with the triggered effect of when a German unit moves into the front line, give it +1 attack and -1 operation cost. And my understanding is that this is once it moves into the front line, so you still have to pay the operation cost for it to move. The first time, if it has 1 operation cost, but for example, if it is a tank, you can move it to the front line for 1, and then its operation cost gets reduced to 0, and then you can attack with it for 0. And this is pretty good. This is basically like a combat engineer plus operation cost reduction. It's kind of like a Greif and a combat engineer combined into one, but obviously it does not have smokescreen, and the credit effect is not immediate. So, how good is this? It's probably a card you play in a Heinz-like deck, particularly if you're not big on ally cards, because this is German units only. But if you're playing Jofin Hines, you still probably run the finish 1-3 tank, but then you run like Lotus Fards and maybe a White Death, and then you're chilling. And you throw this guy in, and then you throw in all of the Blitz tanks and stuff. And then this just gives you a good card to play on turn 2, which can set you up quite well on turn 3, because if you do a 1-cost tank, like a Panzer 2A on turn 1, you play Kratschützen on turn 2. On turn 3, you push the Panzer A into the front line, and then you play a second Panzer A and push it into the front line, and now both of those can attack for 2 attack, with Kratschützens in your support line safe. So yeah, it's a pretty good card in Heinz. I don't really see playing this in any deck other than Heinz, unless Germany gets a non-Heinz aggro deck. But if that happens, I doubt it's going to be a unit-based deck. It will probably be like a burn deck. So yeah, I think this is basically just a Heinz card, and how good is Heinz going to be? I don't think this greatly moves the needle on it, but maybe it does, because operation cost and permanent operation cost reduction is incredibly powerful. You do have to pay the initial cost to operate it, so it's going to take some playing around to figure out how powerful this is, but it's certainly a card that you throw into a Heinz deck. Then speaking of a Heinz deck, we have the Panzer 1A, which is a 1-mana 1-2 tank, 1 credit, I should say. Limited rarity, deployment, draw a card if you control an infantry. Now this is quite interesting, because a 1 credit 1-2 tank draw a card is potentially incredibly powerful for a Heinz-like deck, where you're just trying to get as many tanks onto the board as possible, and this replaces itself in your hand, and it costs 1. It's like a Panzer 38T, but 2 credits cheaper for only -1/-1, which is absolutely a payoff that you are willing to play. However, its draw is conditional to controlling an infantry, which Heinz has typically not done a lot of. So this is interesting. So it's a very powerful card that requires you to build Heinz in a slightly different way than you would typically. And that's fun. I think it's fun to push Heinz in different directions. Obviously, this works with Kratschützen. But you probably don't want to rely on just Kratschützens in your deck. You probably want to run a couple other infantry. So I don't know if that means German ally with combat engineers, or Japan ally with some of the like cavalry regiment type of units, or I don't know exactly what this would look like just off the top of my head on how you would want to build Heinz around this card, but I definitely think it's worth trying out this card in a Heinz deck that is somewhat built around this. I think you'd probably be fine with around 6 to 8 infantry, which is probably fine to run less tanks if you are running more draw, so you are hitting your other tanks more consistently, if that makes sense. And the other thing I really like about this card is it is not a card you ever really want to play on turn 1. I enjoy 1-drops that you don't get the benefit out of on playing on turn 1, because that's sort of the issue with powerful 1-drops, is if you get them in on turn 1, which is entirely based on just do you get it in the mulligan, it can lead to snowballing, whereas this is a 1-cost card that in certain situations you might want to play it on turn 1 because you have nothing else to do, and you're in a matchup where you don't want to lose the tempo. But generally speaking, you are playing this card on probably turn 3 at the earliest. Then, moving on, we have a, would you believe it, a 1-cost German infantry. It's almost like they planned these cards to work together. And it is 18th Infantry Regiment, which is a 1-credit 2-2 infantry. Standard rarity, obviously. And it is a 2-2. So it's a 1-credit 2-2 infantry. We've seen that stat line before. That's a vanilla standard stat line, but this has bond and shock. With deployment, moves into the front line if possible. So this card is very interesting, because a 1-credit 2-2 shock, like we're just going to ignore the bond for now. A 1-credit 2-2 shock is fine. Like, it is better than rate, but rate is terrible. And, like, it's not going to be that impactful. You're not going to play it. But this is a 1-credit 2-2 shock that takes the front line on turn 1 if you go first. Or if you go second and don't play against Soviets or Japan. And that is useful. So its operation is 1, but it's kind of like half because it moves itself into the front line for free. And not only is it like it's like it has 0 operation cost on turn 1 most of the time, because it's also an infantry. So not only is it saving you a credit from having to pay to move it up, it is also saving you a turn that it would otherwise sit in the support line. And now, as I mentioned before, Germany does not have any aggressive unit-based decks that are not Heinz, and obviously this is meant for an aggressive unit-based deck, but as we just saw, Heinz is wanting to run more infantry in their decks, to potentially use the Panzer 1A, and also potentially to use Conquest, because Conquest would otherwise be a weird pick in Heinz, but if you're consistently drawing 2 on Conquest, again, it's fine to run if it's drawing 2. Yeah, you probably just throw in 4 18th Infantry Regiments, 2 of the special, and then like maybe 2 other infantry regiments, of some variety, maybe the combat engineers, as I mentioned, and then you just throw in the Heinz package, and now you have a little bit more draw, you have a little bit more early tempo, and you're just chilling. Because if you go first and you play this, and then Japan trades this in with a cavalry regiment, obviously this is shock, not ambush, so you're not using the shock, but that's perfectly fine. You don't really need shock. Like, in a lot of ways, this card did not need shock, but it has shock because it also has bond, and that's, I guess, sort of the trade-off. Again, I don't think the bond on this card matters basically at all, because Germany does not have any good bond cards that you're playing, and also you're playing this in an aggro deck that doesn't really care about its own health total. So all in all, the German aggro Heinz package is looking quite good. Is this going to be able to move the needle on its matchups into buffs? Because buffs is probably going to still be around after this expansion, which is something you'll hear me talk about more in my video about the balance patches. But yeah, that's sort of the issue. Is this is a very, very powerful package in a vacuum. It's just there is also very, very powerful other things people are doing on turns 1 to 3, which might be better than Heinz. So yeah, certainly this seems like a very powerful package for the future. I just don't know how impactful it will be on day 1. But that's Germany's cards. Now let's move on to Britain. And Britain's card here is why I decided to start with the elites first, because this card, it definitely paints a picture of what else Britain is doing in this expansion. So Britain's elite is Your Courage. It is a 3-credit order that says reduce the cost of cards with bond in your hand by 1. Then your bond units everywhere get +1/+1. So the first part of this tax is pretty straightforward. You play this, and then any card that says bond on it in your hand, whether that is printed on the card or you can give it bond with the British the British 3K 4/4 that gives a unit +1/+1 in bond, if it doesn't already have it. And it reduces all the cost by 1. That's pretty straightforward. The second part of the card is your bond units everywhere get +1/+1. I think this is the first instance of seeing everywhere in cards, but this is a term that exists in Hearthstone quite a bit. And what this means is your units that say bond on it that are on the board get +1/+1. Units that say bond on it in your hand get +1/+1 for when you deploy it. And units that say bond on it in your deck will also get +1/+1 on deploy once you draw and deploy them. And also, I guess if you could pull them out of your deck. So yeah, all in all, this is a very powerful card in a deck with all the bond cards. And we have seen the deck with all the bond cards fall off because it was heavily supported by a specific build of buffs, and we saw that specific build of buffs get nerfed, which has led to people play buffs in a different way, that no longer runs the bond cards. But the bond card package is not bad, it's just somewhat one-dimensional, and this card doesn't help it not be one-dimensional. But it certainly helps that one dimension get better. So yeah, this is already quite powerful with all of the different bond cards that Britain has access to. The weird thing about this is that most of the good British bond cards cost like 1 or 2. so you want to play them out of your hand as quickly as possible. Um, and this card is like if you play this on turn 3, which is the ideal way you want to play this. I just don't know how much you're going to get out of the cost reduction, is my thought. But you're still happy to play this for the buff. Like if you played 3 bond cards by turn 2, and then you play this on turn 3, and you give your 3 bond cards on board +1/+1 plus everything in your hand and deck +1/+1. You're definitely fine if you're only reducing like one thing in hand. But there's situations where this could easily pay for itself, or more, where you have like 5 bond cards in hand, and then you play your courage, and you technically played a 0 credit. Well, you technically played 0 credits, gained 2 credits, give everything +1/+1. So, all in all, I think that this is definitely a help for the Bond deck. Now let's talk about the card design of this card. I absolutely despise this type of card. This is some of my least favorite card design, because if you never draw this card, then your deck is just substantially weaker. In a lot of cases, the Bond units are like 2/2, so like this is a 50% increase in their stats. If you draw this card versus not draw this card, and a 50% increase in the stats of all units in your deck is rather important. And if you draw this card on like turn 7, turn 8, it probably doesn't matter. But if you draw this card on turn 3, and then it just like absolutely giga ramps your deck. And like it doesn't take interesting deck building to just search up Bond, put in every card in your courage, and then mulligan for it. Like that's not interesting or difficult, and I'm not saying that that's going to be the best thing you can do for Britain. Like I'm not saying that this deck is going to be broken. I'm just saying that this deck, you took the most one-dimensional archetype in the game, and then you made it more one-dimensional somehow. You were like, let's give them a win con card that is just all about finding and playing it on curve. And if you do, you win harder. And if you don't, your deck is just as bad as it used to be. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not a fan of cheap card that makes everything in your deck better in a game that has 40 card decks and very little ways to tutor for specific cards. So it just becomes, do you hit it on curve on a mulligan or not? Not that interesting. But let's move on and look at what other cards Britain is getting. So their special is the 25-pounder Mark 1. It is a 4 credit, 2 operation cost, 2/3 artillery. That says, at the start of your turn, this and adjacent ground units get +1/+1. So this is a very interesting card. Because if you play it, and then it sticks around to the start of your turn, it is a 3/4 artillery. And a 4 credit 3/4 artillery is actually quite good on paper. Like the going rate for a 4 cost artillery is 2/3 vanilla. So a 4 credit 2/3 vanilla that then gives you +1/+1 3 times, up to 3 times, for free at the start of your turn is obviously a lot above rate, but obviously also the 4 credit 2/3 vanilla is a terrible rate. And likewise, on paper, like this is the type of card where like if you're in your first like 20 hours of playing the game and you're like at rank 15 and people are still playing all of like the vanilla cards or the 1 keyword cards that you get, this is a very powerful card in those situations because nobody has access to very good removal, and you just kind of play this card and it grows and grows and grows and kills your opponent, and just farms all of their units. In a competitive environment, everybody has removal, and also if they know you're playing this card in your deck, they will save the removal for this card, and then you play this card on turn 4, and then they kill it for basically free because it has 3 health. Yeah, it's just very difficult to use this card in reality. And yeah, the best case scenario I could see for this is you play this as at the high end of an aggro deck. So like you're playing the Bond deck, and then you're spamming out all of these Bond units, and then you just play 25-pounder on turn 4, and now your opponent has to answer all of your other units on board, and then also 25-pounder is an additional threat they have to answer. Now, I don't think that's good. Like, I think that's actively worse than not playing 25 pounder, but I think that's like the best case that you're going to get for this card is playing it in a aggro deck as the top end. Um, but also it only buffs ground units, so you can't play it in air, for example. Which is sort of like the one place you'd maybe want to run it. The other way I could see you play this is you play it in like a garrison deck with lots of pin. And then hope that the fact that this is guarded and your opponent's units are pinned, you can keep it alive. But again, most decks will run order-based removal, or deployment-based removal. So yeah, this is just not that good. Or even just suppression. Like you play this and they suppress it, and then you don't get the buff, and then it's just a 2/3 artillery, which isn't that good for 4 credits. Yeah, all around this is a rather stinker card. Then we move on to the Limited, which is a 2-credit, 1 operation cost fighter for Britain. 2/2 with Bond, and has +2 attack on your turn if you deployed a British infantry last turn. So let's ignore the Bond for now. 2 credits for a 2/2 fighter. Terrible rate. This is bad. This is rather bad. Terrible might be a bit of a stretch because it is 1 operation cost, but it is not a good rate. A 2-credit 2/2 fighter, not a good rate. Has +2 attack on your turn if you deployed a British infantry last turn. So a 2-credit 4/2 fighter, 1 operation cost, is a much better rate. That is above rate. If that was just a vanilla 2-credit 4/2 fighter, would you play it? Probably, because there's just some decks that won't be able to answer it quickly enough, and then you just get in like 8 damage with it by turn 4, and that's enough to close out the game, even if most decks are going to just remove it for free. Now the issue is this is very, very far from a 2-mana, or 2-credit 4/2 vanilla fighter. First off, it has Bond, which, again, if you're playing this in an aggro deck, probably doesn't matter that much. If you're playing it in like an aggro air deck, if you're playing this in a full Bond deck, that could matter, because everything is Bond, so if your opponent is able to keep removing all of your units, you will get up to, like, Bond 6, Bond 7. But we'll get to the benefits of having Bond. Now, the other part of the text is, has +2 attack on your turn if you deployed a British infantry last turn. That means that it cannot get the buff on your opponent's turn, which means on your opponent's turn it is still a 2/2, which means it is also easier to trade into for your opponent. And also it requires you to be consistently playing British infantry units, which means you can't run this in air, because it has to be British infantry units, and also infantry. So, yeah, all in all, the only place you can play this card is a buff stack. Just a full British infantry buff stack. And again, like I said, the deck itself is one-dimensional, and they're also printing one-dimensional cards for that deck. Like this and their Elite can be exclusively played in one type of deck, and that type of deck is put in every single card with this keyword on it into a deck. And yeah, like there were ways to design this card in a way where it could feasibly be run in air in the future. But that is not what happened, unfortunately. Also, this card's just not good. But let's talk about it. Like, you can, if you have this in your hand with the Our Courage or Your Courage, whatever the card's called, then it becomes a 3/3, 1-cost 3/3 Bond. And that's obviously a 1-cost 3/3 fighter is good, but you're playing it on turn 4. And again, you have to keep the stream of British infantry up to get the attack buff. Yeah, I don't know. I just think that this card is incredibly bad, which is shocking. Like, I'm not disappointed that, like, the Bond deck isn't getting broken cards. Like, I don't want the Bond deck to be, like, incredible. It's just shocking that, again, in a mini set, that this card stinks. But it's also Britain, so, like, hey, that's fine. Then we move on to the Standard. It is a 1-credit 1/1 infantry called the Bleeders, which is a pretty funny name. And it is a guard that gets +1/+1 when you play a card with Bond. So this does not have Bond itself, importantly. But this is sort of the guy that you throw out on turn 1 to snowball when you play bond cards on 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6. The issue with this is you play it out on turn 1, and then your opponent plays like Bloody Sickle, or they push up Colm, or they already pushed up Colm if you went second, or like 101 other different things that could happen to this card. It ramps too slowly, its base stats are too bad, it does not have bond itself, which in a lot of situations makes it good, but then in other situations makes it bad. I just don't think that this makes the cut into the bond deck. Like, so many of the bond cards are standards and limiteds that there is like probably 60 plus cards you could put into the deck, and I don't think this is making the cut. This card just seems too weak. You'd rather play a bond card on turn 1 because even though you take the bond damage, the bond card on turn 1 is just going to be more powerful than this. I mean, like, maybe I could be wrong. Maybe if you just like play enough of these, or you just trust that you're gonna go first 50% of the time, and then the 50% of the time that you're going first, a certain number of your opponents aren't going to be playing Bloody Sickle, or just don't have Bloody Sickle, or don't have Rout, or don't have Suppression, or yeah, I don't know. I'm not big on this card. I think the elite that Britain got is going to see play if the bond deck sees any play. I'm not sure this card definitely won't see play in the bond deck. You might play this in the bond deck just because it's a fighter, and it can reach the support line, but like you're not happy about it. Then we move on to Japan, which has more interesting things to talk about. So Japan's elite is Swift Victory. It has some great card art here. It is a 1 credit order, and fitting with the name, it says deal 3 damage. Units in the enemy deck get +3 attack. So 1 credit, deal 3 damage to anything is quite powerful. This is probably worth around 3 credits. Now, 1 credit, deal 3 damage to anything. Your units in the enemy deck get +3 attack. That is not something that you really want to happen. But here's how you use the card. So obviously everybody is aware that, you know, if you play this card to kill your opponent, it doesn't matter that you're buffing their units. But you don't have to save this card for the final blow. This card isn't only good in like a full burn deck. Obviously it is good in a burn deck, but that's not really where you play it, or necessarily how you can exclusively play it. Because there's 2 things to note about this. 1, it is units in your opponent's deck. That is important. So things in their hand and on board are not affected by this, which means you play this, and then they have to draw a unit, and then play that unit, and then that unit then has to start attacking things. And that is going to take several turns. And the other thing to keep in mind is you are playing Jagro. So Jagro, generally speaking, does not care how high the attack is on the enemy units. They could be 1/5s, they could be 25s. They are going to be hitting 2 1s in the front line because you have like 5 units on board and you're just dumping your hand over and over, and they are not in the front line. So obviously there's some situations where this could backfire tremendously if you play it too early, and you aren't able to close out the game. Like, for example, if you're playing against a Heinz deck that has a ton of blitz tanks, and then they're able to do some big turnaround turn, and then on the following turn, they hit like an Enigma into a bunch of tanks, and then just absolutely murder you. Like, I'm not saying you just play this out on turn 1. I'm saying that you are able, against the overwhelming majority of decks, and in the overwhelming majority of situations, you are able to play this for tempo whenever it is best going to benefit you. Like, if you can use this to destroy a guard to keep 2 extra units alive on board, you're absolutely going to play this on turn 4. And it's going to be fine. Like, I think people are underestimating how useful this card is because they're like, well, as soon as you play it, your bad things are going to happen. But this isn't buffing the health of their units. If it was buffing the health of their units, this would be really bad, because now it's much harder to trade things in, it's much harder to make tempo plays. If they get guards, things are really bad. But the attack of enemy units tend to not matter against Japan unless they are also a very aggressive deck, or unless you are losing the game anyways. So yeah, all in all, very powerful card. More powerful and more useful than I think a lot of people are thinking so far. Then we get on to their special, and their special has absolutely zero synergy with the previous card we looked at, but that doesn't matter because it's very interesting. This is the 73rd Infantry Regiment. It is a 6 credit, 6/5 infantry, 1 operation cost, and it has one of the most interesting deployment effects we've ever seen. It is deployment, trigger the destruction effects of all friendly units destroyed since the start of your last turn. So, how are you going to use this? I have no idea. I don't think that this card is particularly good in the current meta or the current cards that exist in the pool, but it is an interesting card. I'm a little worried about the most likely play style of this card, but it is interesting. So you basically play a bunch of destruction units, and then on your turn you trade in all of those destruction units and play some more. And then on your opponent's turn, they're probably going to destroy some of your destruction units. And then on your turn, you play 73rd Infantry Regiment, and then you get all of the destruction effects back of the ones that you traded on your turn and the ones that your opponent killed on their turn. Also, because this is triggering the destruction effects of the units that were destroyed, this will work with the Elephant Boys that triggers destruction effects twice, as well as the Mutsu Yama, something like that. The 3 credit, 3/4 that deals 1 damage whenever a destruction effect triggers. So yeah, this does work with a couple different things. And yeah, this is a very interesting card. Now, unfortunately, it costs 6, and I get why it costs 6, because this is a very potentially high power level effect in a certain situation. So they needed to make this expensive. Unfortunately, they probably made it too expensive to be good. The destruction stuff, they've tried to do this with Japan in the past, with like Jungle Warfare, obviously Elephant Boys, Duty is a Mountain. That's a bit of a deep cut. But it's just never worked. It's just always been too expensive and not enough payoff, and you're playing it in Japan, which doesn't have access to ramp and does not have access to a great stall tools or survivability tools to sort of set up this expensive unit-based combo thing. Now, the worry I have with this card, in the only potential way currently in the game that I can see the scene play, is in a Japanese control deck that uses all of the destruction, deal damage to the enemy HQ, and heal your HQ cards that came out in Homefront. Because if you just like play a bunch of those guards that are, destruction, heal, deal damage to the enemy HQ, and then like if you somehow get enough of those, and then you trigger those, and then you play the 73rd, and then it triggers all of those again, I don't think that's going to be good, to be clear. Just because it is so difficult to get this to trigger more than 1 destruction effect. And if it's triggering 1 destruction effect, that is a very bad play. But like if you are able to trigger like 3 destruction effects on this, then it becomes a good play. And Japan certainly has access to good destruction effects. It's just, again, every destruction effect unit is like 3, 4, 5 credits. And then how are you sticking them on the board and then getting them all to die at the same time and then playing this? It's too many hoops to jump through. But it's an interesting card. Then we have the Kawasaki Key 10. It is a 1 credit, 1/2 fighter for Japan, limited rarity, that gets +1 attack until end of turn after you attack with a Japanese unit. Yeah, basically I think this card is bad. So it's not... Well, I guess it's actually kind of unclear from the text if this triggers multiple times a turn or not. I don't think it matters, to be clear, because you are committing weight. Like, this is the type of card that is good in a deck that loses immediately to a single board clear. Because, like, this is the type of card that you want to play alongside, like, 35 other 1-drops. And then you're just constantly trying to maximize the number of Japanese units you have on the board. And then that way you get the most out of Kawasaki. I don't think that's good. I don't think this card is good. I think Japan has much better things to do. If this had 0 operation cost, that we'd be talking. But as it goes, we have existed 1 credit 2/2 fighters in the game, and they're not that good. And you know when they were good? When they were 0 operation cost. And even then, that would be better than this because this is situational. Yeah, I don't know. This is just a bit of a nothing burger of a card. Then we move on to the Japanese standard, which is Oita Regiment. And that is a 2 credit 1/3 infantry with a blitz. 1 operation cost, which is very important to note when you're talking about Japanese cards. And it says gets +1/+1 when a destruction effect triggers. Yeah, this card's bad. There's just, I don't know, if this came out like 2 years ago, whenever Japan got all of the destruction cards, which I think was Brothers at Arms, like if this came out like I guess it's more than 2 years ago, like 3 years ago now, or 2.5 years ago, maybe, but I just don't see this destruction themed Japan deck working. I don't see it being good enough to compete with decks that other nations have. I also don't see it able to compete with other decks Japan has. This deck just seems bad, and this card is a card that is exclusively good in that deck because it is otherwise very poorly statted. Yeah, like for this card to be good, you're going to have to trigger 2 destruction effects before it's like attacking units, basically. And that's just not that gonna happen. Now, the good thing about this card is that this is when a destruction effect triggers. So this can be an opponent's destruction effect. So, like, I guess it could theoretically be like a meta call if there was a deck that is running a lot of cheap destruction units, and then you like play this at a board clear, and then it gets like +5/+5 or something. But like that's not happening. So let's instead move on to the Soviets. Now, the Soviets are getting a 6 credit elite order, the People's Army. And the People's Army says, fill your hand and support line with light infantry, give them all blitz. So, this is interesting for a couple of reasons. So, first off, this is obviously quite similar to No Surrender, I believe is the card. And that card is 5 credits, fill your support line with light infantry, give them all blitz. So this is you're paying 1 credit more to also fill your hand with light infantry, which, depending on the situation and the deck you're playing, could be a bad thing. But generally speaking, let's assume that this is a good thing. So 1 credit more for feasibly up to 9 additional blitz light infantry is incredibly good. And if also, I should mention, if you don't know what light infantry is, it is a 1 credit 0 operation 1/1 infantry. And there's some cards that specifically mention buffing light infantry, although most of them are not currently in standard. Which is what brings me to the other interesting part of this card, which is why did they print this? Because there's... obviously this feels like a tokens card, because it's summoning tokens, and giving you a lot of tokens. And tokens are not currently good, and you can't really currently make a tokens deck, because there's just not enough tokens cards in standard. You rotated all of the good ones. So, this makes me think that almost certainly they are bringing tokens back in the next expansion. But that does make me wonder why you didn't print this card in the next expansion and instead give Soviets something that they could play now. But, so the tokens argument aside, because obviously this is just a good card in tokens. If you play a tokens deck, you will play this card. Does this card work outside of tokens? And I think the answer is an overwhelmingly no. But the one way it could work is in combination with Workers Unite, which is discard all of the light infantry in your hand, gain a credit, and draw a card for each one discarded. That works quite well with a card that says fill your hand with light infantry. Now, what type of deck is going to want to run these cards as a combo? I have no idea. But you could do it. I just want to bring that up. That is something that could feasibly happen. But all in all, I think this is a mid-Soviet elite for a deck that does not exist, and that is unfortunate. I mean, not that Soviet needed like a great elite, but it's just very bizarre that they get an elite that is explicitly printed for a deck that does not exist in Standard. Like, why did you not print this in like 3 months? Like, and then bring back all of the token cards in rotation. But whatever, here we are. Let's move on to the Soviet Special, which is the Tupolev TB3. It is a 5 credit, 2 operation cost, 3/4 bomber. So immediately, 5 credits for a 3/4 bomber. Not that great stat line. Deployment, though, add 2 I-16 Eshaks to both sides of this unit. And the Eshak is the 2/2 1 operation cost fighter. So basically, you're playing this to get 7-8 of stats that can attack from the support line for 5 credits. And it's all Soviet air units, which is very important for cards like Blood Red Sky, which says give all of your Soviet air units +2/+2. This is a Soviet air unit board in a box. And that is quite good for Soviet air, a deck that nobody has played in like 6 months. So, does this move the needle on Soviet air? I think it might bring people's attention back to the deck, which could potentially lead to people playing it more. I don't know if this is, in terms of strength, good enough to make the deck substantial, like go from bad to good. But I think the deck might not be as bad as people think it is based on how much it is played, because I think people probably largely forgot about Soviet air, and this might bring people's attention back to Soviet air. But yeah, all in all, it is just a fine card for Soviet air. If Soviets ever want to run a combined arms style mid-range deck, it's good in that, I suppose. Like, this is just a fine mid-range card for its stats that it puts out onto the board. It's just, what mid-range deck are you going to be playing with Soviets? They tend to lean control or aggro, and you know, this doesn't have blitz. Soviets tend to want to have things that have blitz. So it's a fine card, and we'll see what it fits into. Then moving on to the Soviets Limited, we have a 3 credit, 3/4 infantry, 1 operation cost, guard. Destruction, gain 3 additional credits at the start of your next turn. And it would not be a good, it really wouldn't be a Soviet reveal, or not reveal, but like, we wouldn't be reviewing Soviet cards for an expansion if they didn't have at least one hilariously broken card. And this is a hilariously broken card. This is absolutely insane. So let's talk about this card. So 3 credit for a 3/4 guard is, historically speaking, great. Now, obviously, we have since had Kirkenes added to the game, and, like, what? Why has that guy not been nerfed? So obviously this is worse in stats and board presence than Kirkenes. But you're not playing this to be for its stats and board presence. The fact that this has guard is insane. The fact that this has 4 health is insane, because its destruction effect is incredible. Its destruction effect is gain 3 additional credits at the start of your next turn. Now, to be clear, these are not credit slots, so these are not like, you don't play this on turn 3, it dies, and then on turn 4 you have 7 credits, and then on turn 8 you have 8 credits. That's not happening. On turn 4 you will have 7 credits, and then on turn 5 you will have 5 credits. But what that will mean is you have essentially played this for free, because it refunds itself, basically, on a future turn. And you might say, okay, 0 mana, 3/4 guard. That seems good. And that is good. But it's also better than that, because it means you can play a card that costs 7 on turn 4. And that's just the example I gave, but like, you can, play an 8-cost card on turn 5. You can play a 9-cost card on turn 6. Whatever you play this card, or whatever this card dies, that's, like, the point is, it's not only does this card refund itself, it refunds itself in a way that lets you play a card several turns before you would otherwise be able to play it. Like, obviously, there's going to be situations where you get 7 credits on turn 4, and then you use it to play a 3-drop and a 4-drop. Or you use it to play like 2 3-drops and move one of them or something. And then it's like, okay, like obviously this is still a very big tempo swing, but it's not playing any individual cards that you wouldn't have been otherwise able to play. But like you could use this to cheat out a big thing early, and that is always going to be a very powerful effect for as long as there are expensive cards in the game. Like, even if there's nothing expensive you want to cheat out now, it means that they can't print anything expensive you want to cheat out in the future. And to be clear, even if you aren't using this to cheat out something several turns before you would otherwise be able to get it, if you're just using this to play 2 3-drops and move one of them, or play a 3-drop and a 4-drop, or whatever, if you are spending all 3 of those additional credits, this card was incredible. And it's a limited. You can play 3 of these. You can play one on turn 3, it dies, and then on turn 4 you play a 4-drop and a second one. Like, this card is insane. This card might make the Japanese card that says deployment re-trigger all of your destruction effects. That might make that card worth it because you're getting the additional credits to make playing that card easier, and then also playing it gives you additional credits on the following turn because you already triggered this. Now, you'd have to be running other destruction effects on top of that to make it worth it, and that's where I think the wheels kind of fall off of that particular idea. But the point is, this card is absolutely busted. If you're not buying the mini set, craft this card immediately. Like, I'd recommend buying mini sets just because it's more efficient than crafting the cards, in terms of just the efficiency of resources for card collection. But holy, do you want to get your hands on this card as quickly as possible, because this card is busted. And it's busted in every Soviet deck, pretty much, because if you're playing an aggro deck, you presumably are playing a card that is going to refill your hand, something like 5-Year Plan. So you want to play this as sort of the top end, quote unquote, of your deck, or one of the more expensive cards in your deck, and then you use it to get 3 additional credits on the following turn, and then you use those 3 additional credits to hand dump, or you use those additional credits to refill your hand at no tempo loss, so you can use it on the following, you can use your full hand on the following turn. Like, insane that you use this in a control deck. Cheat out a big guard. Like they buffed the KV for no reason. But it's now the 4 attack, 7 health, heavy armor guard. Cheat that out on turn 4 against aggro. What are they going to do? Literally nothing. Yeah, this card is absolutely busted. It is frustratingly busted. Like, why is this a card? But anyways, let's move on. I will say it's busted in a new way. It is busted in a way that we haven't really had before. Because we've had, like, credit cheat cards be busted, but those were typically either enabling specific combos or, like, you just get it on turn 1 and snowball from there slowly. We've never really had this type of busted card, so it's new. It's not busted in a immediately better stats and effect and board presence than other things of similar cost. You do have to work for it. And the one thing I will say is you can't control when you get the credits. Well, technically you could by playing it and then killing it on your turn, but that is rarely going to be a good play. But you play this, like say you play it on turn 3 and you really want to get the credits on turn 4, but then your opponent doesn't kill it, so then you have to trade it off on turn 4, so then you're not getting the credits till turn 5. But if you play this on turn 3 and you're like, I really want the credits on turn 5 and I'm going to play it now, so that way I can attack and trade into it, attack and kill it off on turn 4, and then your opponent kills it off on their turn, and now you're getting 7 credits, but you really wanted that 8 credits. So, like, there's technically, like, a little bit of counterplay if you know specifically what your opponent is trying to do with those credits, but you probably don't. And yeah, this card is busted. It's also a Soviet infantry, which allows you to run Zhukov, which is a very powerful card, and allows you to run Zhukov in decks that otherwise wouldn't. So, like, Soviet Air, you might not be running a lot of infantry in Soviet Air, or enough Soviet infantry to justify running Zhukov, but now, if you weren't doing it previously, you absolutely would, because this is absolutely a card you play in Soviet Air, because it's absolutely a card that you play in every single Soviet deck. Like, you play this in Soviet Air so that you can do, you play this on turn 3 and they kill it, and then on turn 4 you play Tupolev Blood Red Sky. And then you've won the game. Like, you played 13, 14 worth of stats on board on turn 4. Congratulations, you're good at the game. Yeah. Anyways, then we move on to a not good Soviet card, which is the 132nd Omsk. It's a 2-credit, 1/2 infantry standard rarity, ambush and blitz, so it's got 2 keywords, and then it says deployment gets +1/+1 for each of your units with 2 or more combat keywords. This does not say for each of your other units, so I assume this counts itself. So if you are triggering its deployment effect, it is effectively a 2-credit, 2/3 ambush blitz. The issue is that's not that good. The issue with this card is you kind of want to play this in an aggro deck, because ambush is best utilized in aggro decks to prevent other aggro decks from trading into you as easily, or on guard units, and this is not a guard unit. And also it has blitz and is cheap, so it's an aggro card that you want to play in an aggro deck. You're not playing this in like the controlling version of the keyword soup deck. The issue is, like, there's just not that many 1-cost cards with 2 combat keywords. Because you want to be playing this on turn 2 or turn 3, ideally, to fit your curve. And just, like, realistically, what 2 combat keyword cards are you going to be playing to get this buffed to a 3/4? Because if you're not playing this as a 3/4, it's not that good of a card. Like, a 2-credit 2/3 ambush is not that good. So yeah, you have to be getting +2/+2, so you have to have 1 other unit on this for you to want to play it. And I don't see you being able to consistently do that in a turn where, like, in a turn where this coming down as a 3/4 is going to be significant. So basically, I think this card is bad. It also isn't really supported by any of the other cards that came out for Soviets this expansion, or particularly the previous expansion. So let's move on to the US. Let's see what US is doing. The US Elite, with a card art that kind of makes me deeply uncomfortable. I don't like this man's face. Is a 4-credit order, Surging Power. And Surging Power says give your top 4 units, give the top 4 units of your deck +1/+1, +2/+2, +3/+3, and +4/+4 respectively. So the first unit on top of your deck gets +1/+1, the second gets +2/+2, etc. So the first 4 units, and they don't have to be all directly on top of your deck. It's just scanning down your deck for the units. This obviously works the same way as the other cards that are seeing a lot of play. I forget the name of it, but it's a Navy card that's seen a lot of play. That's gives the top unit of your deck +1/+1. So all in all, this is 4 credits. And then it gives you 10/10 worth of stats on 4 units you have to then draw and play. So it's a powerful card in a vacuum. The question is what US deck is going to play it. Because you're not going to get a lot of value out of this in like a Brewster's style deck, because that deck tends to actually be somewhat unit... Like, it's not the most unit-dense deck. That deck has a lot of orders. And like you can't get it on the Brewsters itself, for example. So, like, are you playing this in mid-range? That's a very unit-dense deck. The issue with mid-range is, are you able to justify a 4-credit tempo loss to play Surging Power to then get that tempo back in the form of stats down the line? Like, is doing 4 credits on Surging Power better than just doing 4 credits to play a 4-drop? I don't know. It's kind of hard to tell. You're gonna have to. It's gonna depend a lot on the meta, obviously. But the good thing about Frontline is also very blitz unit dense typically. So if you're getting like the +2/+2 or the +3/+3 on like a Greyhound, suddenly that stonks. And it's making up for the tempo loss even more so than just getting the stats, but getting the stats on something that can immediately operate and attack for cheap. So So yeah, this is a powerful card that is going to be interesting to see how good it is. It also feels like Victory Gardens if they thought about how to make the card not suck. And I say that as a Victory Gardens enjoyer. I think Victory Gardens is a very fun card, but obviously they are fairly similar. They are both tempo losses to give stats to units in your deck. Victory Gardens is technically infinite, so you can technically get more total stats out of it, but obviously the Surging Power is much better. Now, let's take a look at the other cards USA have and see if any of them work with Surging Power. So the first one is 15th Engineers. It is a 5 credit, 1 operation, 1/2 infantry, which is one of the worst cost to stats we have ever seen. But obviously you are playing this for its deployment effect, and its deployment effect is gain 1 extra credit slot for each unit in the front line. Your units gain equal amount of attack. So this is a bit of a difficult card to parse. So there's 2 situations where you play this card. Let's talk about the first one, because it's the more straightforward one, which is your opponent. You are playing this in a ramp deck. You played turn 2 War Machine. You didn't, maybe you played like a guard on turn 4. Your opponent has, or on turn 3. Your opponent has had full control of the board and is playing a somewhat aggressive deck. They're trying to rush you down because you're a ramp deck. And by turn 4, for your 5 credit turn, they have 3 units in the front line. And then you play 15th Engineers, and it gains you 3 credit slots, so that on your turn 5, you will have 9 credits. So it's like a War Bonds, but you lose the card for the 3rd credit slot, for example. Or they have 5 units, and you play this on turn 4 to gain 5 credit slots. That's insane. Now, the issue, of course, is that they then hit you with the 5 units, and you probably die. But, you could theoretically get some crazy ramp out of this. Now, what's interesting about this card, though, is that it says it doesn't specify enemy units in the front line. So you could play this in not a ramp deck, where you are in fact a sort of a frontline deck, or a Brewster's deck, where you're spamming Brewsters into the front line. And say you have like 3-4 units in the front line, and then you play 15th Engineers, you gain the 3 credit slots. I don't know exactly how you're expected to make use of that. I don't think you're supposed to be playing any 9-10 cost cards in your deck because you run this. But you then get to use the second part of this effect, which is your units gain equal amount of attack. So if you have 4 units in the front line, and then you play this 15th Engineers, all of your units on board in front line or support line get +4 attack, as well as gaining the 4 credit slots. So basically, it is a card that has 2 different effects, and technically you get both effects if your units are in the front line, but realistically you're not going to be using the other part of it that much. So yeah, it's an interesting card. It's a multifaceted card. You can play it in a number of decks. The issue with this card is I just don't see it being that good. I think in a ramp deck, you'd rather just play War Bonds, because you want the guaranteed ramp. Like if you're playing against air, this does nothing. And also you want the card draw. And if you're playing against, and if you're playing this in a Brewster's deck or in a frontline deck, I just feel like there's cheaper ways to more consistently buff your units than this. I could be wrong about that, just because the buff to the HMS, is it the Illustrious? Or no, the HMS Yorktown. I think that's right. The one that summons all the Brewsters. That card did not need to be buffed whatsoever, and obviously that card has incredible synergy with this. So maybe you could play this in a ramp deck that is running Yorktown, specifically to set up a 2-turn sort of lethal with this. You could do that. So people are going to play this card. I just don't know if those people are going to be players in tournaments who are playing this card. I would be shocked if this card saw a substantial amount of tournament play, but it's also a special, and it is a special type of card, because if this was a standard, you would never run 4 of them. But I could see this card being as I'll throw one of them into a Brewster's deck, because sometimes I go late against a control deck, and then I play this for a ton of damage output. So yeah, all in all, interesting card that supports existing archetypes. This is a well-designed card. Then we have the 1st Defense Battalion. It is a 1-cost, 1/2 infantry for the US with 0 operation cost and blitz. They did it, boys. They did it. They replaced the 164th. The US finally has another 1-drop with 0 op and blitz. They can compete against the Colms and the cavalries of the world. Okay, so what's the actual card? So it has blitz, but it also has bond, which is unfortunate. But again, if you're playing bond in a deck that does not run a lot of bond cards and you're an aggro deck, you don't really care about the bond. So you can largely ignore the bond. And once again, I would like to bring up the fact that I think bond should always start the keyword. Like, I get that they're putting it in alphabetical order to do blitz and then bond. I feel like bond should just always be first. Like, I feel like there should be a specific order that keywords appear in based on, like, how important they are to the card. Or like how important they are to see first on a card. But that's a separate discussion. So it's blitz bond for a 1-credit 1/2 US card. It says deployment, get +1 attack if you have a US unit in the front line. So it's a 1-credit, sometimes 2/2 0-op blitz card for US. Stonks. Now, obviously, when it is not a 2/2, it is a 1/2, which is much worse than a 2/1, because then it can get farmed by 2/2s or 2/3s, much more easily. But it's still a 0-cost, or is a 1-cost 0-operation USA unit, which is something that deck has desperately needed. And sometimes it is even better than that. So this is a card that will be played in a frontline type of deck. Now, is frontline going to be good? Because I don't think this is that good in like a Brewster's type of deck, because I feel like Brewster's has just got to do other stuff. But maybe I could be wrong. But just for the future of the US nation, going forward, I think this is just a very important card to have. I understand why they rotated 164th, but like this is a very important card for US to try to have competitive decks, tempo decks that compete with the other aggro tempo decks of the game. So all in all, I don't actually have a lot to say about this card from a design perspective. Like, it's a fairly straightforward, simple card. But that's what USA needed. So I'm glad that this card got printed. Then we get to a very interesting card, which is the M2A4. It is a 2-credit, 2/3 tank, 1 operation cost, doesn't have blitz. No blitz. So the 2-cost, 2/3 blitz tank is sort of like the rate for like a good tanks. Now this is a standard, not like a special, like stuff like Whirlwind. But it sometimes has blitz because it has the passive effect, has blitz if this has 3 or more attack. And oh boy, is this card potentially interesting. For several reasons. One, the US does not have that many good 2-drops for a frontline type of deck. Like, they had 1-drops, they just didn't have 1-drops that they... Like, they didn't have a 0-op cost 1-drop. And also it's a 0-cost, or a 1-cost 0-op 1-drop that also triggers 35T, which if we're going back old school to the German ally frontline, could be useful. But the M2A4 is a 2-drop that you can just play on turn 2. If you draw it in your hand, you have it in your hand on turn 2, and it comes around to turn 2, and you have nothing else to do, you just play this as a 2-cost 2/3 tank, and that's not good, but it's fine. It's a body on the board that's going to trade, it's going to push to the front line, it's going to draw you with Shermans, it's just a unit on the board. But once you use this with cards like Surging Power, or you use this with the card that I'm completely blanking on that gives +1/+1 to the top unit of your deck, or the unit, the 2-cost 2/4 Blitz Bond unit that when it attacks, it also gives a unit on top of your deck +1/+1. But it also doesn't have to be +1/+1 in hand. You can play it on board as a 2/3 and then play for freedom on it to get it up to 3 attack, and then blitz with it. So it is basically like a US, so it's a 2-cost USA unit, which is good for curve, good for Sherman stuff, that can situationally be given blitz, which is very important for also the front line's typical win con of throw a bunch of stuff into the front line and blitzkrieg. You like to have blitz cards. And it also directly synergizes with cards like Surging Power if you do want to go for that sort of tempo loss style. This is just a very well designed card. It's very good. It fits a number of different needs that a number of different US decks wanted, and also have other cards that directly synergize with it. This is like look at the 4 US cards that we got. Like, yes, this is a bit derivative of Victory Guidance, but like this is a solid card, solid card, solid card, solid card. The US got 4 solid, potentially playable cards that support existing archetypes that aren't very, very broken, aren't very, very unfun to play against. Just 4 solid cards that will be good in the game for the future of the game. Like, this is like the best 1939 has done with designing like an inclusive package of cards that come out together with each other at the same time that I have like ever seen, or at the very least seen in the last like 4 years. Like, well done. A+ on designing the US cards. Excellent. I'm very excited to play Frontline, even if it's not good, because again, buffs is around, and that's a whole other thing. Maybe you play this in buffs. But we'll focus on the positives here. 1939, well done on the USA package. Then we get to the special card, or the ally cards. So each of the 4 ally nations get 1 card. And again, it's a mini set card, and it's an ally nation card. You better expect these cards to be giga busted. So the French one, Maginot Line. 3 credit, 3 cost order, limited rarity. You can run 3 of them in your deck. And it says, give target ground unit +3/+4, and cannot retreat or be suppressed. So, there's a few different ways to play this. I think the first one that probably comes to mind for most people is you focus on the cannot be retreat or suppressed aspect of this, and you say, okay, you play it on a guard. And then what does an aggro deck do? Like, you play this, and you're giving 4 health to a guard. You're also giving it 3 attack, which means it can trade down with some of even the beefier stuff. You can even use this on something like, for example, the Soviet 1/8 guard. And then it becomes a 4/12 guard that cannot be retreated or suppressed. Yeah, that is absolutely a way you could use this card. There's 2 other things that I want to bring attention to with this card. One is that it's like a 3/4 blitz in that, and also you don't have to pay operation cost for it. So, for example, you play this in an aggressive deck, where you play this in like a Japan-France type deck, for example. I don't know if you'd want to play this in Japan-France, because it doesn't have direct synergy with the Juffle stuff, but like if you were just playing a more traditional aggro deck with Japan-France, you can play this on Dragons or Cavalry Regiment, or if you do it in a Soviet France deck, you can play it on Colm on turn 3, and then with 0 operation cost, you hit them in the face for 3 additional attacks. So you basically played 3/4 stat line on a 0 cost operation tank, essentially, because it also can't be retreated or suppressed. The retreat doesn't really matter as much, but it stops things like suppression from being like, your 3/6 dragons goes back to a 1/2 dragons. Or sorry, your 4/6 dragons goes back to a 1/2 dragons. It can't be suppressed. So you play this on turn 3 as an aggro deck to just snowball really hard. That is very powerful. The other thing to note about this card, though, because it's a very powerful defensive tool, it's a very powerful offensive tool, it specifies ground unit. And like 99% of similar cards will say infantry or tank, not ground unit. So this can be played on an artillery, and then you have an unretreatable, unsuppressible +3/+4 artillery. Like, if you play like Tank Gun or Katyusha on turn 2, and then on turn 3, you give it +3/+4, you now have a 4/6 artillery that can't be retreated or suppressed. That's insane. This card is incredible. I'm very excited to see the decks people figure out with this card, and I'm also sure in 2 months we will all be complaining about this card, because this card has a high potential of being very abusable in a number of different decks. And that's kind of what you want from a card like this. Like, I'm not going to say that's bad card design. Like, if they have to nerf it in 2 months, that doesn't mean it was bad for them to have released it. But yeah, this card is very, very powerful. Probably the second most powerful card we've seen, after the Soviet one. Then we have the Italian card, the Caproni CA-133. It is a 3 credit, 2 operation cost, 2/3 bomber, so abysmal stats and cost. And it has a passive effect, or a trigger effect, of your HQ gets +2 defense when you deploy or add a unit. Yeah, this is kind of bad. This is just not that good. Like, obviously, there's a number of things you can, like, save this for, and then you play it with, like, the any number of summon cards, and then you can get, like, +6 defense all at once for only, like, 7 credit, 2 card combo that leaves you with a bunch of bad bombers that die to any board clear or any units on board. Yeah, this card's just not that good. Unless there's like some crazy combo that I'm missing with this card, it's very difficult to see that this card sticking on the board for more than a turn. And because it's a bomber, like, it's already a high priority target, but it being a bomber, 1, makes it a higher priority target, but also 2, makes it easier to kill. Yeah, I don't know. This card's just not that good. Which is, like, again, we look at how incredibly powerful this card is in so many different decks. Like, you could build any France deck, and unless you're like OTK, Super Fortress, you'll probably want to, like, you'll consider running Machino Line because it's that good. This card, like, basically only works in a very specific deck, and it's not good in that deck. And also, that deck doesn't exist. Yeah. Unfortunate L for Italy here. Moving straight on to Poland, we get the 12th Ulan, a 1 credit, 3/1 infantry, limited rarity, 1 operation cost, and it has Blitz and Fury. So, we tend not to see, like, I know this card's not vanilla, it has 2 keywords. But, like, a vanilla-ish card here, where it's just 2 keywords, and those 2 keywords are also generic keywords from the base set. They're not even, like, new keywords. But this is a vanilla-ish card, and we tend to not see vanilla-ish cards for the Ally Nations, because why would you give an Ally Nation a vanilla-ish card? You can't run a lot of those cards, and those cards tend to not be good, also. But, of course, it's Poland, so, we're going back to the give Poland absolute crap train, I see. Now, is this card actually good or bad? So, 3/1 is a terrible stat line for a card that does not have 0 operation cost and blitz. Now, it has 1 operation cost and blitz, but basically you would want to be playing this card to the front line on turn 1 for it to be good. Now, obviously this card would just be giga busted if it did have 0 operation cost, because it would just be like Cavalry Regiment plus Bicycle Regiment. The issue with Fury and 1 operation cost, though, like, if this was 2 cost, 0 operation cost, I'd consider playing it. Maybe. Not really, but at least it would be a lot better than this. Because then you can attack with it. Like, if it does survive a turn, you can then attack with it for free while getting, like, a tempo gain. But, like, you play this on turn 2 and push it to the front line. If it survives by some miracle, you then have to invest 2 out of your 3... Well, you don't have to, but, like, for you to get use out of this being at the front line, you have to then invest 2 out of your 3 credits on your following turn attacking with it. Yeah, like, I don't see what this is meant to be played in. Like, it does have 2 combat keywords. So we talked about with the Soviet guy, the Omsk, I think it was, that you wanted a 1-drop that has 2 combat keywords. And this is a 1-drop that has 2 combat keywords. The issue is that it completely locks you into playing Polish ally, which is not something you necessarily want to be doing. And 2, you want a 1-drop with 2 combat keywords that isn't going to die immediately. And this is unfortunately going to die immediately. Yeah, I don't know. This is it just seems like a bad card. But it's also not only a bad card. Like, I don't know why they didn't give this to Soviets. And then give Poland the absolutely busted Soviet Limited. And then at least it's an absolutely busted card in Poland. And then you have to play Poland, and that's the downside of playing that card. Yeah. I don't know. Bad card. unfortunately. And then the last card of Homefront Early War is White Guard. The Finnish card here is a 4-credit 4/4 infantry with Blitz and Guard, and it has the passive effect, units dealt combat damage by this unit are destroyed. So it has the Sissy effect. It has the poisonous, the death touch, whatever you want to call it. And it's on a 4/4 for 4 with Blitz and Guard. So the Blitz thing means that for 5 credits you can kill anything in the front line. And the Guard means that for 4 credits you can play a Guard that kills anything that hits it. It's fine. Like, I don't think you'll play this card. But it's not because this card's bad, it's just because it's in Finland, and Finland has incredible things to do. And even if it wasn't in Finland, it just feels like a card that's just slightly too weak to want to see play. However, if you pick this up in draft, this card will be excellent in draft. And yeah, that brings us to the end of the cards here for Homefront Early War. All in all, I think it's going to have, in a vacuum with no balance patch, I think it will have a small impact on the meta. Certainly it will impact what people choose to play. I think by far the biggest impact is going to come from the Soviet 3-cost card. And just all of the different Soviet decks that enables. But this is also going to be coming out alongside a balance patch, which I will talk about in a future video. So subscribe if you haven't already, so you don't miss that when that comes out. But alongside a balance patch, I think that this will have a good wave impact on the meta. I think people will play new cards, they'll be playing new decks. I don't think that this will dethrone the top decks of the meta. Specifically looking at things like buffs, I think buffs not being nerfed was a massive mistake and a massive oversight, and I hope that it gets nerfed as quickly as possible. But that being said, overall, I'm pretty excited about some of the cards. I think Japan got some interesting things. I think the US got exactly what it needed. Not exactly what it needed to like make a clear tier 1 deck, but exactly the tools it needed to want to experiment with different things in the US package. I think Tupolev for Soviets is interesting. I think their limited is giga busted. From the Ally Nations, Maginot line is very interesting. The other 3 Ally Nation cards are all various versions of bad or boring. Germany got a whole bunch of support for Heinz, so playing Heinz should be interesting, and especially playing Heinz in a different way than Heinz has played in the past. And then, what's that, Britain? Yeah, Britain got a hot pile of trash, and also support for one of the most boring decks that has ever existed. So yeah, all in all, W for US, Germany, Japan, and France, and then L's for Britain, all of them minor nations, and then Soviets. They got some, like, to be fair, when I say W's and L's, I'm not talking about power level of cards, I'm talking about card design, and how interesting to me the cards are. But yeah, all in all, a bit of a mixed bag, but you had some really excellent stuff in here from 1939. You had some really problematic stuff in here. Yeah, all in all, I'm excited to play with the new cards. So hopefully there will be some videos of me checking out new cards, showing off new decks when the expansion drops. And I haven't mentioned it yet, but the expansion drops tomorrow, on the March 10th. So, yeah, expect more content on this YouTube channel, in the coming days. So I hope all of y'all enjoyed that. Let me know if you agree with me, disagree with me, did I miss anything? All in the comments down below. What is the first deck you are going to play with the new cards? And I will catch all of y'all in the next one.